Good afternoon. My name is Grayson Court with City of Sammamish Parks, Recreation, and Facilities. Today's presentation is Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Esports. This presentation was prepared for the 2020 WRPA Annual Conference. Due to the governor's stay-at-home orders, this presentation is being recorded as an alternative, but hopefully will be shared with conference attendees and others who are interested in learning more about esports and equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. Just a note, I am doing this presentation without a headset, so if you hear any feedback or any static, I apologize in advance. The co-presenter today was going to be Jacob Beach, esports coach at Centralia College, but of course due to social distancing requirements, I'll be doing this presentation myself. Jacob provided some really great information to city staff on how to understand esports and how that can be delivered to communities. Me and another staff member from the City of Sammamish visited Jacob at Centralia College, and he was able to give us a tour of the esports arena at Centralia College, and also was able to answer a lot of really great questions and provide some really great information about esports, the industry, and how to be able to successfully roll that out to the community. So again, big thank you to Jacob Beach. If folks have any questions about esports or what is being covered today, Jacob is a terrific resource, and I'm going to be providing his contact information as well as mine at the end of this slideshow if folks are interested in following up further. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on towards the first slide in this presentation. So an overview of esports. So esports is competitive organized video gaming. Esports can be individual or team-based, and we can have live and or online events. The image below here is at UC Irvine, and you have an event in action where you have two individuals who are competing one-on-one in live events, and this is kind of a good example of folks wanting to kind of see what esports looks like. This is a really good example. So a discussion about esports. What makes esports a sport? So similar to mainstream sports, there are several things that are very similar. So for instance, critical thinking, problem solving, and research. So if you want to be successful in esports, you want to be able to understand what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and to be able to also then understand your opponents, its weaknesses and strengths in order to be able to win a competition. There is team building, collaboration, communication, especially in esports competitions where it's team-based, and just like in a basketball game where teams are naturally collaborating and working together as part of the natural flow of the game, you see the same thing in esports. There's a lot of production, media, marketing, and business skills that are involved. You see this a lot on the business side. So for instance, in the NFL and UFC, or the recently created XFL league, there's a lot of media marketing that goes behind this, and you see the same thing in esports. In esports, what's a little bit unique from your typical mainstream sports would be emphasis on budgeting, data analytics, statistics, and then being able to make those mathematical calculations just in a split second. Just like in any other sport, in esports requires a lot of training, emphasis on a work ethic, and be able to perform under pressure. Esports has a very large audience, so you'll see a lot of competitions that are either streamed or recorded on platforms such as Twitch or Facebook Gaming or YouTube. And then in just general, the esports has a really strong community, and during these type of competitions, you do see really large amounts of people who are either tuning in on one of these streaming platforms, or also in-person competitions. There will be arenas where there actually is seating where people can actually watch live in person, folks competing against one another. So esports has definitely become a lot more popular in the mainstream these days. High school leagues across the nation now offer esports competitions. There are scholarships for students who want to play esports in college. There are colleges and universities. At the time of this presentation, I can think of several D1 institutions that have varsity programs in which they recruit students to become student athletes. The International Olympic Committee is considering esports and having discussions about whether or not to adopt that as an Olympic game. Professionals travel the world for tournaments and prize money, and there are careers that can come out of esports, not just in the competitions, but in the marketing and the business and the distribution of esports. So a good example, there's a gentleman here on the right, his name is Tyler Ninja Blevins, and he is one actually of the more famous athletes in the world. Is kind of hard to believe, even sometimes based on certain polls, even more popular than Cristiano Ronaldo and other iconic athletes across the world. Tyler in 2019 made approximately $17 million, not just in winnings, but in sponsorships such as the Red Bull insignia that you see on his shoulder. So this is something that has been becoming much more popular, and something that we really want to make sure that folks know is not just kind of a fringe movement, but is something that is becoming much more common these days. So now that we have an overview of esports, we want to provide a little bit of an explanation about the type of equipment that would be needed to be able to run a successful program. So equipment includes computers, monitors, consoles, games, mechanical keyboards, wiring, gaming chairs, lighting tables, gaming mouse pads, and peripherals. One thing to note, and this was something that was really important, that was stressed, a requirement for monitors to really improve the performance and the user experience for an esports event would be having monitors that have 1 millisecond response time, be 144 hertz, and between the lengths of 24 to 32 inches. A good initial setup would be having about 16 PCs and 14 consoles, costing approximately $19,000. What's really important though is when you have a space for esports is that this is dedicated space and you have dedicated staff and gear for esports room. So this is more than just having a computer lab off on the side of a building. This is a space that's designated just for esports. Also want to make sure that your esports arena is organized around specific games and that it's large enough to be used for competitions, tournaments, practices, and camps. And especially important is allow accessibility and wheelchair access. And we'll talk a little bit more about accessibility in further slides. One thing also to consider are the operating costs. It would be useful to budget about $2,000, which goes into replacing and updating equipment every 2 to 3 years. That's kind of a traditional cycle of equipment that you want to make sure that you have updated equipment for an esports arena, as well as money that goes into new games and expansions and some other costs that you may be incurring over the course of a year. So now that we've provided an overview of esports, now we want to move to the discussion of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, we're talking more than just race, but a lot of other different factors as well, such as gender, socioeconomic status, physical ability, race and ethnicity, and sexual orientation. So a really good example of this was when I did the site visit at Centralia College. There was an individual, a student athlete there, who was physically limited and to a wheelchair. And despite that, this individual still was a varsity athlete who was practicing for a competition, a tournament that the team was going to be going to across, and I believe it was in Boston. And he was sitting next to his teammates, joking, chatting, practicing together. And for me, that was really impactful because it's really hard to see really good examples of like that in other sports. And this was a situation where, this student was more than just, kind of a token, disabled student for the sake of having diversity. He was there because the team needed his skills in order to win. And so, in my opinion, whether or not you consider that to be esports to be a sport or not, that is something still that is just so critical to be able to support and encourage. And so this is one of the reasons why for me, esports for me feels like a really great opportunity to be able to provide that level of accessibility for folks who used to not have that level of engagement with others. So what are the type of steps that need to be taken to ensure that equity, diversity, and inclusion is incorporated into programming? First is conducting a diversity audit. So what is going on now? What do we need to do in the future to encourage diversity? We want to ensure preventative approaches are encouraged, as well as enforcing a code of conduct. So having a zero tolerance policy to say that we have requirements and that we have an expectation that you follow those requirements to make sure that people are included in our organization and included in our programs. Make sure that you have programs for diverse participation, encourage co-ed play, and provide support networks when folks are not in competition. Accessibility is also really important. We talked about that in the last slide. And if you see here on the right-hand side, you have an individual, he had lost his use of his limbs due to paralysis, but he still has the tools needed to be able to compete on esports and interact with folks, where previously he wouldn't have had that. It's really important to have moderators. So in an online event, to be able to, for instance, like a referee, to be able to ensure sportsmanship is being followed during a competition. Having folks going through bystander training to intervene when you see something that's going on out of place, and this in general to be able to incentivize social leadership. There are some really great other resources out there about equity, diversity, inclusion in esports. One example I liked a lot was the Esports Inclusivity Plan from UC Irvine. Another really great organization is called AnyKey and had some really good resources. One is a good example of a code of conduct for folks to adopt, and really great white papers on women in esports, barriers to inclusion and retention, best practices for gender and esports tournaments, and then best practices for event organizers in order to conduct live streaming moderation during events. So that is it for today. Again, just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to watch this presentation, and special thanks again to Jacob Beach, who provided some really great insight and resources and recommendations on how we can deliver esports to our communities. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to Jacob and I, and we'd be happy to be able to work with you and answer any questions you may have. So stay home, stay healthy, be safe, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon. Take care.